Ambassador Muthu Kumar, you made several interesting observations in the first segment of our interview. Particularly striking was India's strategic interest lies in promoting a cohesive Afghanistan, because that's what Pakistan is really worried about. And I hope people who are listening to this interview listen carefully and listen deeply to what you have to say. I want to shift focus now to how Afghanistan fell so quickly to Taliban, and especially
How Afghanistan?
fell. And how Taliban
Rolled in.
and one would have thought that the famed Panjshir Valley, now everyone in the world knows about it. But you were one of those, probably not one of those, probably the only Indian who has in-depth knowledge, because you were there on the ground 1996 to 2000, actively helping securing India's national interest in that region.
Well, if I have to look at it, it fell because it was weighed down by the seamless corruption, which I said in the earlier segment. And importantly, with the last US soldier leaving, there was no chance of the Ghani government lasting 18 weeks, as some suggested. The government was not to last because there were three important men within Ghani's administration. Mohib, the National Security Advisor. 2, Dr. Fazli, the Chief of Staff of Ghani. And 3, Masoom Stanikzai, the Chief Negotiator for Afghanistan in Doha. These three seem to have been playing their own agenda or their own strategy, and I'm not sure whether Ghani was very familiar with what they were actually up to. Since the signing of the Doha Agreement, it was all set to have a new government, and that Ghani would very nicely have arrange for a transitional government, and he thought he still would have a role. But as things rolled and panic overtaking Kabul, Ghani had no choice. Then he saw almost his fall, and he wanting to resign, and his vice president opposed to his resignation to allow the Taliban to come in to form a transitional government. All these speak. And when the meeting was held to take a decision on what the transitional government would be, how it should be shaped, and things like that, the Taliban were already on the outskirts. And being on the outskirts, that was a signal that they could walk in any time. There was the 201st Corps that allowed it to be on the outskirts of Kabul. Then there was the 111th Special Unit or Special Corps or whatever. They were supposed to be there to defend Kabul. But all of them just melted away because there was a very simple solution worked out: a strategic surrender or a controlled surrender designed by the troika of the NSA, the Chief of Staff, and the Chief Negotiator in Doha. So what you found on August 14th and 15th was Stanikzai's advice and counseling of Ghani that it's time for him to leave, and meanwhile you also order an evacuation list from the palace, and you work out all these things. And which meant that Ghani had no time to work out a peaceful change of government. On the other hand, Stanikzai, as a matter of fact, warns him that his life is under threat, so you should be leaving Kabul, as the Taliban have decided to execute him. Now, whether this is true, that the Taliban plan to do that, we do not know. But then that was some kind of a presidential palace coup to have Ghani out. And Ghani left at about 10:30 in the night in a special flight. And by 12:45, you had the Uzbek commander marching into the palace, taking over charge. And by 1 o'clock in the morning, you had the Taliban flag flying over the presidential palace, which they call the Arg.
So did Panjshir fall in a similar fashion? Were leaders bought over?
Well, the Panjshir Valley falling was not with, on this note, I must say, I was very saddened because I lost two very dear friends of mine. One was Fahim Dashti, a young journalist. Well, he's about 48, 49. And then, of course, my dear good friend, Wadud Zor, Abdul Wadud. Abdul Wadud was the nephew of Masood, and I have interacted with him very intensely for 4 years during 26 and 2000. And of course, I know Fahim because he's a young journalist, and they were very good source, and they were my reliable source on Afghanistan. And of course, I miss them very dearly. May their souls rest in paradise, I always say. And so they fought and they fell on September 5th. But the final, fall of Panjshir was more, capitulation of Panjshir was more what I call monetization of everything in India is a new fad. So I use the word monetization. So it was a monetization of a surrender by some Panjshiri leaders. Because even the Panjshiri leaders were quite fed up with the Ghani associates who are trying to live off this resistance to continue, and people are tired. Now, I look at Amrullah Saleh, a man with a lot of good vision, a man who has been a close associate of Ahmed Shah Massoud. But he is a man with no military experience, good mind, and he had no base. He was not in connection with or connected, he did not have the connectivity needed with the Panjshiri leaders. Neither did that young boy Ahmed Massoud. Ahmed Massoud, a product of King's College London and an alumnus of the Royal Military College Sandhurst, all these meant nothing because they do not have needed leadership quality. Of course, Ahmed Massoud has a good following amongst the youth, but that is where his strength lies, and that is what should be used. But then to become suddenly a resistance leader will not work immediately because you're so ill-prepared. If any resistance that has to happen to the Taliban by the Northern Resistance Front or the National Resistance Front, call it what you will, it can't be earlier than spring of 2022. They can only train between now and then for that. So I will not even look at that resistance to happen immediately. I won't even look at it because if the cohesiveness of Afghanistan, building the cohesiveness of Afghanistan and bring about a reconciliation amongst all the ethnic groups, then there is no need for resistance. There is no need for a fight. So you'll have an all-representative Afghan or a pan-Afghan government. Now, that is where again I say that will be our strength for India. So this is how we have to look at it. We can't look at the Taliban with a very partisan view. If you're anti-Taliban, then you are pro other ethnic groups, which will not fetch you anything.
So clearly, the National Resistance Front is not Northern Alliance, of the past, and presumably also you mentioned spring because winter will set in soon.
Yes.
A lot of passes in Panjshir will close. It becomes difficult to fight. So that's the time when NRF can prepare for resistance. But again, General Registani, Vice President Saleh, people that you know very closely, are not of the same mold as Commander Ahmed Shah Massoud, who knew the mountains well, who had who could fly line of sight,
Yes.
who knew the geography. He had walked every inch of that land. Um, will any such resistance bear fruit? And will other countries, including India, get into this quagmire of creating another sort of impossible situation in Afghanistan where violence rules? There is civil war. Can the world, can the region afford this kind of situation?
I can only think of two countries that can sort of come militarily extend assistance when the crunch comes. That is Russia and to Iran. And we will be a third factor if we decide to. And Tajikistan, of course, is very much anti-Taliban. And Tajikistan has certain affinity to the ethnic Tajiks in Afghanistan. And they will for sure make available space on their geographic territory. But, as I said, between now and the starting of the resistance, if some reconciliation mode takes over, and then Arabs are known for hugging each other anytime, and they also are treacherous with each other. They can stab each other. So, but let us give that kind of a chance, and if that chance happens, then what happens to the resistance that you are planning or contemplating? So it is not, as I said, when the Taliban came in 1996, they were blatantly anti-people, any which way you looked. So there was a world interest to see that this does not overwhelm the region, and so therefore the assistance to Northern Alliance led by Massoud meant a lot. And of course, when you talk about assistance, Massoud knew the Afghan landscape like he knew his two hands. And Massoud was a man who could fight with only the cap that he wore. That much space was enough on his land for him to start his fight. I can't say that of Massoud Jr. or Amrullah. They don't have that fervor. They are young and not very consistent in their outlook. The outlook is more that how do I displace Taliban? Now, well, if you dislike the Taliban, you'll day and night you'll be dreaming and sleeping and thinking how to displace these characters. But then I would rather advise them that spend some nights thinking on how to make Afghanistan a better place than war-ravaged. Now, that is very important. And if I have to look at the Panjshiri leaders who surrendered to the Taliban, maybe even for money, but that's everywhere and all over Afghanistan. Money is important. That is where I have no fear of Sirajuddin Haqqani either. He's got a good walloping $10 million on his head, an FBI award. And leave it to Afghan treachery. Anything
Somebody
can
will
happen.
get him. Somebody will
Yes.
seek him out.
So, in Afghanistan, small money to big money, treachery is workable. Everything gets monetized in Afghanistan when can it benefit you individually or even it benefits your family better. So therefore, there is no fear of many things. But then, like people like Ahmed Massoud, what can he do? Little boy. He may be 32, but he is very little, even by my age. He has no experience. He does not know his land. He does not know Panjshir.
What about the other factors at play at a strategic level?
You see-
Countries like the China factor, the Turkey factor,
Okay. I'm happy
and the
you,
Qatar factor.
I'm very happy you referred to Qatar, Turkey, and China. China has come with a princely sum of 30 or 35 million dollars as aid to the new government. And of course, the new government also found rooms and rooms of dollar cash, which run into millions or hundreds of millions. And I do not know what they will do with that money, because what China gave $35 million, I do not know what they will do with that $35 million, because the present Taliban is cash rich. So, being cash rich, the $35 million comes, they say, so it's all right, as they say, chai pani ka kharcha. So it can handle that. But in terms of China playing a real role, China plays a very dicey role and very difficult to gauge and judge Chinese motives. And the Chinese are there anyway for you to see. They'll be there. And once they come in with their men. They don't hire people on their projects. They come with their men to do projects.
So China has business interests.
The business interest, China has business interest anywhere. Now I must tell you, Afghanistan is an unexploited, natural resource rich country. Only Jawazjan and Balkh area has more than 60 billion barrels exploitable oil, unknown quantity of gas. And on the Amu Darya basin, other than the alluvial gold and silver that flows, there is also a very large reserve of liquefied natural gas or liquid natural gas, which are all there for exploitation. And that is where I see the Emirate of Afghanistan, if I have to call it Emirates today, that is what the Taliban insists is the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. But they need not even mention it's Islamic. They can drop the word Islamic and just call it the Emirate of Afghanistan. That will suffice, and everyone will know it is Islamic. So they need not over-rub that Islamic factor, but they can be the Emirate of Afghanistan, and they can still be prosperous, do well. Afghans have very talented human resource. If anything stabilizes in Afghanistan, you will find Afghans returning home. The Afghans have this very unique home instinct. They all wish to return home. Rich home or poor home, they all wish to be home. That is one thing in amongst the Afghans, which makes the nation very different.
So Chinese have business interests. What about Turkey?
Well, Turkey is already showing business interest. They are already working. They started with the international airport of Kabul International Airport. They are handling it. And they
At a strategic level, what kind of interest, their national interest gets served in which way?
For the Turks, they are more what you call the Hanafi tradition in terms of Islam, and where they'll work out what you'll say a consensus, a consensual decision on many things with the Taliban, and they'll go about it. They'll have the jirga associated at various levels to take decisions for the well-being of and that is exactly what Erdogan's plan is. He'll cater to their Islamic needs while also catering to the Turkey's economic cooperation needs. Economic cooperation with Turkey is they're more flamboyant than India is. The Turkish economic cooperation, technical and economic cooperation is, I would say, far superior to the Indian technical and economic cooperation. they make it a point to let it be known that they are doing this. And their publicity for their activity is more to show that, well, we have also an Indian Technical Economic Cooperation, ITEC. To a large part of it, as a matter of the Turkish Technical and Economic Cooperation, very much based on the Indian model. But they have succeeded, while we are still very docile. Till today, we are not finalized, have a routine exercise on receiving these ITEC fellows who come from overseas. We still have not have a pattern to receive them and take them to the institute where they are the thing. They land here and then they are in the lurch. Nobody to receive them, nobody to think, nobody to care for them.
So, Ambassador Muthu Kumar, we'll just need to take a break at this point and we'll return with us.